Māori whānau. In this episode, we're going to explore an issue that is very topical and has really motivated a whole lot of whānau across the motu to get involved in politics. And that's the current coalition government's view that the creation of Māori wards and constituencies should be put to an at-large poll. Now, let's unpack this a bit, because for those of you who are interested, you already have been a part of the campaign to ensure that we have more Māori voices around the council decision-making table at the top level, making the kinds of decisions that will impact on communities and livelihoods. But really, I want to talk to many of you who don't know what the kaupapa is about and want to be involved in supporting more Māori in decision-making. And it's not an easy kaupapa. In fact, just the other week or so, I participated in a forum at Omairora Marae in Whatawhata, and a whole lot of local government representatives, councillors, and people who are involved in the campaign turned up. Let's break away to that and have a little bit of a listen to some of the kaupapa. But if the project is around representative equity, which is removing all discriminatory barriers of establishing Māori wards, the greater project is to ensure that our participation in our democracy builds a sense of inclusive nation building. That's the big project. Yeah. And why this matters is we know that by virtue of being involved in the way that our communities thrive and prosper and grow, strong communities care, our participation matters, and we have to be around the decision-making table. What I did is pulled out basically the core elements of my submission to support Tony and Dini and everyone going to the tribunal. And this gives you a sense of how my mind worked. If we look at the history of Māori representation in New Zealand, really the policy that was being applied at the time, and I am condensing a whole lot of history, was a containment policy. Effectively, Māori seats in Parliament were introduced to contain what was then Māori as the majority of the population, and then introducing settler government policies based on a Westminster system over in England. So let's be under no shadow of a doubt, it was never ever intended to favour the way in which we were going to have long-term vested interest in the growth of representation in our country and the establishment of settler government. So let's just tag that in, know the reality of it, and then say, okay, so then what? And those who study this with some degree of vigour will probably pinpoint back representation to the 1852 Constitution Act and the establishment of provincial government. We know that level of representation was based on land holding. We know that individual land holding was what was brought here from the UK. We know that didn't recognise multiple landowning interests, and the individualisation of title, and all of that was not designed to favour the way, again, that representation of provincial government and central government evolved. So again, tag that in. But why that matters here in the Waikato, Raipatu totally disenfranchised us from having a land owning interest. So we are doubly impacted by the historical establishment of representation in New Zealand. So, you know, little old Māori girl from Rahui Pōkeka goes into Parliament, hones my craft at trying to understand the Westminster system and Parliament and all of that. And then fundamentally, when I got the opportunity to rectify some of the challenges in these areas and becoming a minister, I knew when I got to be Minister of Local Government, this was something that had to change. And the reason why it had to change is that we needed to restore some equity, some balance in the way that the laws of the land were prohibiting our ability to have a say in this country. I can remember when I was a lowly backbench MP, when Sandra Lee was the Minister for Local Government in 2002, and she introduced legislation to make local government more progressive And she was still constrained by political attitudes at the time. I can remember sitting around the select committee table when the issue of trying to establish Māori wards came up, and it was a political decision in terms of having the 5% threshold, because at the time it was seen as too progressive, perhaps even triggering, to have no type of rein on the way in which Māori wards were being established. We did raise this as backbench members of government at the time to say this threshold is actually a threshold that is too high and will probably not lead to having Māori representation around the council table. But again, it was a political decision. So, you know, it is what it is at the time, but became what we foreshadowed it would be, a barrier too high, and it became a discriminatory provision. I can go book, line and verse into that, but that'll have to be off live stream. So I hope that effectively my submission provided some insight into what propelled the reason for change, that recognised that the legislative mechanism that we were trying to remove provided a right of veto to the wider population to vote against the establishment of a Māori ward, and that didn't apply to any other type of ward. I'll also say that at the time when I was addressing this issue, there were elected members, members of LGNZ, members of Te Maruata, who identified that this was a discriminatory barrier, had to be removed. And at my very first local government conference, it was an issue on the agenda that was raised by these peak bodies. So I said at the time, the current system has a different set of rules for establishing Māori and general wards, and that uneven playing field needed to change. The process of establishing a ward should be the same for Māori and general wards. Should be the same, but it isn't. And these decisions for democratically elected councils who are accountable to the public every 3 years should have the ability to have a say, to make that decision. We elect our councillors. They should have the ability to have a say in terms of what's good in our region. And then I go on to make the point and amplify the fact that the polls were an insurmountable barrier, which I've already spoken to. So, interestingly enough, the reason why this is such a vexed issue in terms of Māori representation is because local government is the last bastion of representation that has very unequal playing fields, and it has been accepted to be the case. There's the saying, one person, one vote, but what about the non-resident vote that happens out in the Coromandel? You know, people in Auckland owning their batches, and they have a vote. It's not one person, one vote for all the time, and we need to kind of bring some light to that. Also, the issues that are core to what local government does have created kind of constituencies of interest, invested interest. And when you unbundle that, that's why we have private water schemes. That's why some people get a say in the way in which resources are being used and where they go to. That's why, in very basic terms, you'll have tar seal all the way up to that farm gate, but the marae further up the road, loose gravel and infrastructure and the like. So you start unbundling the way in which decision-making has happened over a very long time in the local government space, you'll start to understand where the vested interests are, where the resources went to, and so on, and so on. So you get a sense of why this is being a charged issue. This is a charged issue at the moment. So I'd basically go on to say, with the support of the then President of Local Government New Zealand at the time, the late David Cull, and a number of key councillors around the country who were prepared to put their hand up and say we need to sort this. And they were tangata tiriti as well as many Māori who were involved in the ecosphere of local government. We charged forth to make the change. And I'm quite proud of that change, and what we would have witnessed over at least the last 2 annual Local Government New Zealand conferences is a notable shift within the room, not just of having Māori councillors, but the shift in dialogue towards a broader conversation about how Māori are contributing to community outcomes, to regional growth opportunities, to the types of partnerships that really, I think, change up the way in which we're thinking about our long-term future. And that's got to be a good thing, eh? Well, we think it is. That's why we've got to retain it. But the success stories weren't strictly driven by legislative processes, to the extent that if we go back to the whakapapa of representation, a local bill was introduced, supported by Mitirerenui, to establish the Bay of Plenty wards, quickly followed by the Waikato Regional Council, who made a decision around the council table to establish Māori wards, consulted on it, got that over the line. Interestingly enough, that chair, Jenny Vernon, lost her seat as a result of doing something like this. But we did have 2 regional councils who went down the route to establish Māori wards. So we've got to lock that in. That was because of the courage and determination of those councillors around the table at the time to create Māori wards at regional council level. But it made sense because of the evolution of treaty settlements, because of natural resources being an area where Māori had expressed a natural interest, because of the RMA legislation. So it followed that representation to secure those gains were complemented by other things. Then we got those councils who were the early adopters of Māori wards, and this was the time when the whole campaign of establishing Māori wards was being led out by local communities and champions to be able to push on that door, to open it wide open, to say, actually, we need Māori wards and our councils kind of deserve it. So you go, the demographics didn't lie. We had areas, we had lots of Māori in a local region. They were the ones who was leading the charge forward, again, creating that compelling case for change. Complementing that were also other kinds of considerations. If not a Māori ward, then what? Māngai Māori, mana whenua representation and as advisory groups or things like that, joint committees, they all became complementary adjuncts to what was the ultimate goal, which was to have Māori wards. So we have all of that in the ecosystem of Māori representation. And might I say that if this government is successful in repealing the Māori wards changes that have been made, we still need to push on the many other avenues to have Māori voice and representation around the council table as a foothold. But it's not merely a cultural nod. People say, oh, you know, you're the Māori around the table, you've got to do the karakia and, you know, have the Māori, exclusive Māori view around the table and da-di-da-di-da-di-da. It's not merely a cultural nod, because what Māori councillors bring to the table is a perspective that can complement those other views around the table which contribute to regional economic opportunities. And that's really important because that counts for something when you sit around the council table. They're always talking about not just roads, rates and rubbish, but actually how do we bring growth into our region? What are the types of necessary partnerships that could be added to? And I do believe that Māori councillors can add value to that kind of a conversation, especially given the way in which the Māori economy is growing, the way in which PSGEs are contributing to that growth trajectory, the way in which Māori lands, trusts and incorporations are contributing to that growth trajectory. Also, there are strategic social and cultural opportunities in terms of the conversation. How do we get more cohesion? And I would point to the COVID response as a real practical response of where Māori organisations, iwi organisations stepped up to the plate, where others failed to get into the communities that were most vulnerable or needed help, or could create a very quick stand-up network to respond to things like the COVID response. Then we know that in terms of the complementary network of relationships that Māori are involved with in the social area, it's about community cohesion and collaboration. And again, your councillors, your Māori councillors, you'd be hard-pressed to find a Māori councillor around any council table who didn't know what the what was in their own community and which organisations to go to be able to respond. And obviously improved environmental outcomes. This is really the foundation of the benefit of having Māori voices around the table. And again, this harks back to the RMA legislative mechanisms, but also treaty settlements, which has a strong focus on natural resources, water, land, whenua and the like. So coming to the end, I think the narrative for all of this protest about what the government is doing still has to maintain a progressive outlook and demonstrate that by a more inclusive future is one that unashamedly assures us that Māori voices around the decision-making table has to happen more. The other thing is that when we talk about social cohesion, you can't have a discriminatory provision and then talk inclusion, diversity and equity. Diversity, inclusion and equity all go together, and at the core of that is representation to encourage more participation. So, you tell me what the logic is to justify where the government thinks it's going on Māori Wards. There is no logic. The other thing is about having a confident narrative about collective and shared aspirations for the future. And when I say a collective and shared aspiration for the future, it's tangata tiriti and, ourselves. Because if we don't have the foundation of what the fabric of our society is made up of, then it's hard to reach out to be inclusive to everybody else. So I think the workshops are designed to tease some of that out. And then I thought, and then there's the tungi. Now you could pick any tungi you wanted or any whakatauki from around Aotearoa that would inspire us to actually hold fast to the gains that we've made. But actually we're doing this because we want our kids to have a better future. We're doing this because we know that discrimination of any kind is not the place. There's no place for it in our society anymore because we have evolved. We're doing this because we know that when our voices and our perspectives are affected into decision-making, planning, consents, land use, impacts on our taiao and things like that, then we are far better prepared for a more resilient future with intergenerational benefits. It's that in a nutshell. There's no magic around it. It's just simple. That's how our tupuna gave it to us. That's how we've got to give it to our kids, pretty much like that. So I think if we're engaging in this challenge of a very reticent set of policies impacting on our people, yes, we protest, but we'd be really smart about the way in which we state our position, because I know that many of you who are sitting in and around the council table making decisions, you can point to local examples, very localised examples of what the benefits are. And it's dropping to that level of detail to put your hand on it so people can hear, see, touch and feel the impact of having your voice around the council table. And that's what we need to be bringing out in the submission process. Kia ora tātou. So you can see that, a lot of people are motivated to ensure that we keep Māori representation in our councils and around that decision-making table. And you can understand why when we think about the things that matter to us. It's everything from having lights at our local recreational facilities, our fields, so that our kids are safe and can train it into the night, but in a way that they're going to be looked after because of lighting. And then there are other things like when natural weather events happen, that we're building the resilience of our marae and our communities. Or if you're in small towns and communities, footpaths. Making sure that the rubbish collection is done in a timely way and affordable for us. So there are those types of issues. And there's also the issues around our awa, making sure that the regional council are making decisions to ensure that the cleanup of the river is an obligation now going forward into the future. There is so much happening around council tables that we can all be involved in and take responsibility for. But none of that's possible if we don't have people people around the table. That's why I wrote a submission in support of the Waitangi Tribunal claim to try and stop the legislation going through, and that's why I also wrote a submission to Parliament to support the retention of Māori wards and constituencies. Now let's look around the country and figure out what's happening here. We've got 50 odd mayors that have said, let's keep Māori wards and constituencies. And they're saying that because their reality is that you have to work with mana whenua, with iwi, with Māori in the community to be able to have a joined-up approach to creating community wellbeing, whatever that looks like. Whatever that looks like. You can't say that Māori shouldn't be there. But let me give you an interesting piece of information that might actually prick your curiosity and motivate you to take action locally. The 1852 Constitution Act actually established provincial government. And that level of representation was based on whether or not you had a landowning interest. Now, let's go back in time and unwind that, because Māori land tenure, collective interests in land, didn't give you an interest in being able to have a say in the way in which settler government and provincial government was being established in New Zealand. So take Waikato, for example, the fact that we had raupatu and 1.2 million acres of land confiscated, and our rights to our whenua didn't actually occur at all. So we were doubly impacted. We were disenfranchised because we had land confiscated, disenfranchised because of the way in which our lack of access to establishing our rights and interest in land could be achieved. So, these are all hard issues. And then let's roll it forward. What does it mean if we have Māori around the council table making decisions? It means that we have more diverse perspectives, that we can take account of all our communities. And when I think about rural communities, our towns, our metro areas, but also our marae communities, they're all given an equal or balanced weighting of focus by those decision makers. That's why we need to ensure that we maintain the pressure to keep Māori voices around the council table. Now, all the decisions will be thrown back to a poll should the government be successful in getting their bill through. And the simple message is, if you don't vote, your voice doesn't get heard and your view isn't counted. So we have to be more involved in local government politics. We have to get out and vote. We have to make sure we vote for what we believe is important to our community. And if you believe in a Māori voice around the table to improve community decision making, to improve diversity, inclusion, and equity of access to the types of resources that are being, resource decisions that are being made by council, get involved. Simple message, get involved, whānau.